How's it going, YouTube? In today's video, we're going to be discussing on how to play Xerath in the mid lane. I'm going to show you 3 different builds that I currently run and give the best tips that I can give you to hopefully improve your gameplay. Without further ado, if you do enjoy my content, make sure to leave a like and a comment down below, and let's get into it. All right, let's take a look at our first room page. So the first room page is going to be the comment page. We're going to be running this page when we're facing assassins or champions that hard outscale us. A lot of times you'll see me running this room page if I'm facing a Zed, Fizz, Vladimir, Akali, stuff like that, where if I don't set them behind early or I don't get the early game lead, they just hardcore start diving us. So as you can tell, this is all about early game damage. We have the Comet plus Scorch and Cheap Shot. All 3 runes are very much early game focused, but if you notice that it doesn't leave much for the mid to late game. We do have the absolute focus when we're above 70% health. We get up to 30 AP depending on how long the game is, and we do have Ultimate Hunter, which reduces the cooldown of our ultimate in the later parts of the game. So the pros and cons of this rune page is you do a lot of early game damage. It's really good at sending people behind, but if you do fall behind with this rune page, you feel disgustingly weak. So you have to win early, you have to snowball and set them behind, because like I said, if you fall behind, you just feel like you do no damage. So the next rune page is Dark Harvest. This is probably going to be the #1 rune page I'm going to recommend in the mid lane, and let me explain why. So the Dark Harvest, again, is such a great for the mid to late game. It scales hard with the AP. The stacks actually don't matter too much, because if you look at it, every time you get a stack, it only increases the damage by 5, which isn't that much. I mean, it's like if you do get a crazy amount of stacks, it's great, but realistically, you get the stacks from raw AP. In the early game, we do have the Cheap Shot and Scorch, so we do not lack in the early game damage department at all. We do have Eyeball Collector that gives us 30 AP when we do get 10 assists. So it's really good. Plus we have Ultimate Hunter, which allows us to have a really short cooldown on our ulti, and we have Mana Flow Band, so we don't ever run out of mana. So this is just like solid early game damage, scales really well into the mid game, and of course allows you, if you get ahead in the early game, Dark Harvest really lets you snowball the lead. So this is all around my favorite build to go, but let's look at the next one, at the hyperscaling Xerath build. So the hyperscaling rune page is of course going to be First Strike. What this does is when this rune is off cooldown, if you hit first, it increases your damage by 9% for the next 3 seconds, and then it converts that extra damage into gold. So 70% of the damage dealt is converted into gold. It does have a very long cooldown. Sounds like a very strong page. And let me go through the rest of them before I explain why I absolutely do not like this rune page. You do get a free 300 gold boots, and it also increases the move speed of your boots by 10. Minion Demon Utilizer allows you to effectively clear the minion wave. You use 2 of them on the melee creeps and 1 on the range. This allows you to W the front wave and Q through the entire wave. You can fully clear the minion wave off a lost chapter. Cosmic Insight reduces the cooldown of your flash, TP, ignite, stuff like that. And of course, Story 3, we have Mana Flow and Scorched for the early game damage. Now, why do I hate this rune page so much? The reason why I hate this rune page is you're actually so weak without the early game runes. You only have Scorch with your early game runes. Like, yes, you do have First Strike, but realistically, it's such a long cooldown, and to effectively proc it, it only gives you about like 9 gold on early game trades. So it's like, it really doesn't do much damage at all, and it only really starts like kicking off once you have like a Ludens or 2 items. That's when it starts printing gold, but your early game is so weak without having Cheap Shot, Arcane Comet, pretty much 2 early game runes, you just deal no damage. Even though you're like, oh well, you deal decent damage. Honestly, no, you don't. So I'm going to advise you, definitely don't do this rune page. You can if you're facing like a Galio, Veigar, where they're just never going to trade with you. But if you're ever facing another mid laner who is just guaranteed to trade with you, just run Dark Harvest. That's my biggest recommendation. But let's get into the tips to hopefully give you some helpful ideas on how to improve your Xerath gameplay. Okay, so I want to do a quick overview of the two different builds that I do. The very first build is, of course, for facing a squishy team. You're going to be starting out with a Doran's Ring. And the very first back, I do want to say, make sure you buy a Dark Seal. This is such a gold efficient item because it only costs 350 gold and it gives you 15 AP. And of course, for every stack you get, it is 4 additional AP, where Amp Tone is 435 and only gives you 20 AP. Also, Dark Seal does upgrade into Mage Eyes, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So our very first item is gonna be Ludens, and then this is a point of the game where I would say, and after Magic Pen Boots, is at any point in time after you have these two items and you're doing really well, upgrade this Dark Seal into a Mage Eyes. I normally upgrade it once I'm at 7 stacks, 6 stacks, stuff like that, and then you upgrade it into Mage Eyes. And as for our second item, we're going to be getting Shadow Flame because we want to stack that Magic Pen. Now, the big thing about Magic Pen I do want to caution you guys is if the enemy team is stacking MR, flat Magic Pen actually doesn't help out at all. The only way you're gonna get through the magic resist is building Void Staff. So if you see them building MR, make sure you build Void Staff third item. If they're not building MR, you can go Death Cap. And Void, like I said, is very interchangeable. If you notice I'm not building any defensives, I really build Hourglasses. If you are facing like a heavy dime comp, like a Nocturne, like a Rengar, you can go Hourglass instead of Mage Eyes, but majority of the time as a Xerath, it's all about being a glass cannon. Putting yourself behind building a defensive doesn't give you that much damage, and even though you survive for a little bit longer, it's not kind of your core job. Now, if we are facing a tankier team, like there are 3 bruisers and you don't have a good way of dealing with it, like you don't have a Caitlyn, Kog'Maw, stuff like that, like there's just, you can see there's no way on your team to deal with it. Instead of going Luden's first item, we're gonna go Leandre's. So we would go Leandre's Void Staff majority of the time because we're facing a tankier team. They're gonna be having a lot more magic resist, and of course we're gonna be going into Death Cap, Horizon, and of course we're going to be having a Mage Eyes built in there somewhere if we're doing well. If we're not, you can make your last item a Shadow Flame. So those are my 2 different types of builds. I run those builds every single game. All right, let's get into the tips. So the very first tip is probably the biggest tip I can give to any Xerath player, and that is quite literally doing the WQ combo. There's so many times where I see so many Xerath players where they're just spamming Q in lane, but they never throw the W and the Q together. You may be like, yo, that sounds so simple, but you need to do it. It's also so important, especially with the Dark Harvest page, because of Cheap Shot. Every single time you throw your W and then land your Q, you get the Cheap Shot to proc, whereas if you're just throwing your Q, you're never going to proc the extra early game damage of Cheap Shot, and this rune can stack up the damage so fast. Now you can throw out single Qs to manage the wave if you need to trim it and you're just trying to harass that way, but realistically every time W is off cooldown, we just want a W then Q. Tip number 2 as a Xerath player is I see so often where Xerath players are doing their full combo with their stun, where in laning phase I need to let you know that if you're spamming your E off cooldown or consistently using it, you're going to find yourself running out of mana. We don't want to use our stun. The only time we want to use our stun is if we're going for a guaranteed kill, or we needed to disengage. If they're chasing after us, that is when we want to throw our stun. Stop using it because you're going to be out of mana in no time if you're doing a full combo. A lot of times in laning phase, of course, with the previous tip, just throw your WQ and stop throwing that E. Tip number 3 has to deal with your jungler. If your jungler is looking to gank you as a Xerath, the biggest mistake you can do is just throw your E to start a fight. The majority of the time, you're going to miss the stun because it's incredibly hard to hit. What you want to do when your jungler ganks is just throw your W. See if your jungler can follow up with any kind of CC. If not, and then you can throw your stun. Hitting a slow target is 10 times easier than hitting a target with a dash or no slow at all. So definitely always start off the fight with the W. See if your jungler can follow up. If not, then throw your E. Never just blindly throw your E at the start of the fight. Alright, tip number 4 is a fun one. It has to do with your ultimate. It is how to shoot a fast Xerath ultimate in a pattern. So a lot of times, so if you are ganking a low health bot laner, what we're going to do is of course shoot first directly on them. The reason we're going to shoot directly on them at the first is a lot of times they don't see that ulti. They don't see that tiny little line that comes out from you when you press your R. So you're going to shoot it straight at them. Now they realize they're being shot at. So they think they're going to be clever and dodge backwards. And then your last shot is going to be right in front of them. But of course, we're going to do this in a rapid succession. So 1, 2, 3. And if you notice, we're not doing it like crazy far behind them. We're keeping it like like pretty much still touching them, but slightly behind them. And majority of the time, if you shoot this really fast, this works majority of the time. So looking at the early level, especially level 1, if you notice what I'm doing is I'm pressing Q and I'm spam auto attacking. A lot of times I'm just trying to match the enemy mid laner. Since he's trying to push, I'm trying to counter push this, because if this lets it crash under tower, we have a really hard time CSing under tower. I don't care how good you are, everyone has a hard time CSing. So if you notice, especially since he's doing aggressive trades, I'm not scared of him, especially with the Dark Harvest rune page. We can definitely trade effectively with them. I'm trading auto attacks, but of course I'm more worried about this minion waves. Make sure you continually spam auto attack, keeping this wave even, and then once we hit that level 2, if you notice, this is the very first thing we do the WQ combo. We get that cheap shot proc, we get the Scorch proc, and he loses a lot of health. But then, again, this is why we're running the attack speed runes, we go back to CSing. So I do miss some CS here, which is unfortunate. I could have done it better, but we took a bad trade. It is what it is, but he is under half health. Our Dark Harvest is already back up. So again, we're looking to keep the wave even, spam auto attacking, back to the same thing, waiting for our W to come back up. And there it is, our WQ. We get the cheap shot proc, and look how low this guy is. Off just 2 WQ combos with that cheap shot Scorch, we are just obliterating this lane. He has to E away. He uses all of his health potions to try to recuperate his health. One big tip I say is definitely, if you do take trades, pop that health potion, because he still has 1 health potion, but this is a main reason why he loses this fight, is just for the sole reason he's so low and not popping his health potion. So he calls his jungler to help hard cross this wave, and what we do is we get a cheeky stun, pop ignite, get the flash auto just because we're a little bit greedy, and our jungler is there to counter it. Now, just to show you how this entire play unfolded, it has to do with landing 2 WQ combos and keeping that wave even for good CS. And that's really it for Xerath laning phase. It's just rinse and repeat, get lost chapter, keep the wave on your side of the field, and just look to do small trades and backing off. So to talk about the mid to late game, a majority of the time you would see mid and bot swap, but with Xerath and a lot of poke mages, you don't swap with your bot lane per se. You can go down and soak, but majority of the time you're still just gonna sit mid and play for the poke, because if you go bot by yourself, you're gonna get caught out and die every single time. You really want to be holding someone's hand at all times. You never want to be by yourself. If you're by yourself, even under tower, people can dive you at this point in the game. But majority of the time, the only time you're ever gonna go bot is to catch a full wave or push out another wave, and you're just gonna go straight back mid with your bot and AD carry and just play for poke. That's your entire goal as a Xerath. So it goes for anything. Just don't go by yourself. Always be with someone, be with your team, because you are not a 1v1 champion. You play off other people. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this educational content. If you want to see more like this, make sure you let me know down in the comments down below so we can talk about maybe harder matchups or how to play lane. But without further ado, I hope to see you guys in the next one.